Good morning. Welcome to week 14 of Anthropology 309W. I hope you all had a good weekend and that things are going okay. Please continue to stay in touch with me and let me know how things are going. I really like to hear from you. I'm happy to review your rough drafts, to answer questions. I'm happy to give you extra time if you need it on some of these assignments. Speaking of that, I only have field notes from about half of you, so the rest of you who didn't turn in field notes yet, please get in touch with me if you're feeling like I can't do field notes because I can't go out into the field. Get in touch with me and we'll make a plan on how you can do that in a different way. And thank you to people who have already done that and turned those in. If you didn't see my announcement this week, I decided to let you drop your 3 lowest reading response grades. So if you're feeling like you don't like some of the grades or you're feeling a little bit behind on those, hopefully that'll relieve a little bit of stress so you can drop 3 of those grades. And I will still give you the same number of points total for the reading responses. I'll just average what you have left after you drop those 3 lowest grades to get that final grade on the reading responses. For your final paper that's due May 5th, I wanted to remind you that I'm asking you to upload a video or audio presentation since we can't do in-class presentations in the last week of class. So you should create an audio file, just record yourself talking, or you could do a video one, which would be preferable probably unless you have a good reason for doing an audio file. You can use Microsoft PowerPoint to record yourself. We don't have to see your face if you're not comfortable with that. You can do a PowerPoint presentation and just record your voice on there. And I'll post a video on how to do that if you're interested in that. It's a little bit harder to do it with Google Slides. You can just use Zoom to do your video like I'm doing right now. There's lots of ways to do it that are not too technical. If you're worried about that, please get in touch with me. What I'd like you to do for the last week of class then is to watch some of your classmates present on their research and give them some comments or feedback. So upload those into the media gallery by April 28th. And then I want you all to watch some of theirs so that you can see kind of what other people did and give them some constructive feedback. Definitely start out with some positive feedback. What did you like about it? The thing that I'm going to be looking for most in these presentations is that we all learn something. So make sure that you're actually teaching us something. So I'm going to share my screen with you here, and I'm going to talk about the final ethnography rubric and some detailed instructions that I've uploaded to BB Learnin this week to help you start thinking a little bit more about that. So this week, week 14, we're going to be looking at religion and ritual in cultural anthropology. And so I have you reading Gmelch's article on baseball magic, which I think is a good one because a lot of anthropological theorists have talked about ritual as something that doesn't necessarily have to be part of a formal ceremony or part of a formal kind of what we think of when we talk about ritual. We can ritualize lots of activities. Anthropologists like Clifford Geertz have written about ritual and meaning and how people don't even really have to be aware of the intended meaning behind elements in a ritual. It's the action of it that can give meaning to daily life. We talked about what Marx thinks about religion as the opium of the masses in class. We talked a little bit about Weber's interest in religion and meaning creation with the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. We talked about Durkheim's ideas about religion and how important it is to have a sense of social cohesiveness and important. He thought that when people lost kind of faith in religion, that they would need something else to replace it with. So religion and ritual are really central to anthropology theory and cultural anthropology. For this week, so we're going to be looking at this silly crash course video, but it's a nice one that does an overview of theories of mythology and ritual that I think you'll find interesting. It touches on some anthropologists, some psychologists, and it gives a really nice overview, I think, of ritual theory in anthropology. Not going into very much depth, but giving you kind of a general overview of it. And then we're also going to be looking at this TED Talk called The Power of Ritual. That hopefully, if you watched the taboo video last week, this will give you a little bit more context for how anthropologists look at things like that. It has some of the same kind of imagery, so if you're really squeamish, you might want to just read the transcript on that one again. We have a discussion board for this week. Make sure you remember to post on the discussion board, trying to keep it on just one thread. So discussion leaders even, please just reply to each other all on one thread so that we can kind of all participate in the same conversation. I think it works better that way. And then for this week, I want you to start thinking about, as your sort of activity for the week, be working on your analysis and interpretation. So take the time for this week, other than watching those 2 videos, to work on your analysis and interpretation section. So do your coding if you haven't done it already. Select your best quotes or your most important themes and some quotes that illustrate those themes, and start writing up that section. It's really the most important section of your ethnography, and you're going to want to have some time to work on that. So don't leave this till the end of the semester. Start working on it now. In here, I posted a PDF of the slides that I presented in class, the qualitative analysis slides. So I don't know if you were there. Hopefully you remember this PowerPoint that I showed in class. It has also links to some of the videos that we watched about how to do your coding. So it has those YouTube links in there. It has some of my guidance about how to do coding. It has some pictures of our activity that we did in class about coding. So if you have questions, please let me know, but hopefully this will give you some good guidance on coding if you couldn't remember how to do that. So also here I have some examples of what is meant by subcodes, codes, and themes. So subcodes, you might have a code that's something like perceptions of leadership here. And then in there, your subcodes, which you would kind of like code your data with, would be types of leadership roles, good leadership, and bad leadership. And then you're synthesizing your codes into themes. So maybe 3 codes, your perceptions of leadership, your influences on leadership, and your differences in leadership, if this is what your project was focused on, would all kind of go into a theme of leadership. Or maybe you would kind of synthesize it even more and say, you were studying leadership, but the theme that came out is that people are really, it's really important for the leader to have some charisma. And then you maybe want to relate that into Max Weber's theory of charismatic leadership. So the themes are things like that, things that help you interpret your data, things that relate back into cultural anthropology. And then here I have a piece of that assignment that I posted. So I posted a big assignment rubric. It's here in the week 14 module. And then I also have posted it here. So for your interpretation section, you don't have to submit it to me. I made all the rough drafts optional if you didn't remember that or didn't catch that. This is also optional, but it is not optional in your final written ethnography. You do have to have this section, and your section should describe what you found out. It should explain your findings and interpret them. So don't say, my people know what they're talking about so they can speak for themselves and just post a bunch of videos. You need to interpret them. You need to tell me what they said means from a cultural anthropology perspective. Most of it needs to be your writing with a few quotes to illustrate it. The video that I posted a couple of weeks ago explains how to do those quotes. You need to have an introduction to the quote, you need to put the quote in, indent it, and you need to explain then how the quote relates to your broader theme. So the whole thing cannot be just your participants' words. It needs to be your words interpreting what's interesting about what they told you. Your job is to say how this community is interesting anthropologically, what you found from an anthropological perspective, and then to use quotes to sort of illustrate your interpretation of what's interesting. You should describe at least 3 major themes. So I was talking just a minute ago about themes. The themes aren't your codes, they're what is interesting that came out after your coding process. So in your methods, you should describe your codes, you should describe your coding process, and then you should describe how you came up with your themes. And then you should probably put subsection headers in your interpretation section with at least 3 overarching themes of interest that came out in your research. I should be able to see how the quotes from your participants support your observations. It should be pretty obvious to me that that quote is an illustration of the theme that you're describing. And you should also be in this section clearly linking to concepts from cultural anthropology. So in each theme, I would like to see at least a few citations that show how that theme is relevant to cultural anthropology with citations. In-text citations are really important in any document. Not using in-text citations for a comment about something that's not directly from your research is considered a form of plagiarism. You need an in-text citation for anything that is not your own original idea. Everybody knows is not acceptable. You need to go find out who said it. Find a citation. If you're wanting to use something from an outside source, go in Google Scholar and search for somebody who you can cite on that idea to support your ideas. Your interpretation section should be at least 5 pages long, but note that in these page ranges that I've given you, so I said 5 to 7 pages on this one, I said 1 to 2 pages for the introduction. If you've gone with the minimum on each one, you're gonna probably need to do a longer interpretation section. Just keep in mind that your final ethnography needs to be 15 pages long. So if you're doing the minimums on each of these ranges, it's not gonna equal that 15 pages. So try to make sure that you're kind of adjusting and making sure that your sections are long enough to meet that 15-page requirement at the end. You should tell me, it should be very clear to me from your interpretation section that you collected all of the data that you proposed, or that you collected data that changed in light of this COVID-19 situation, but that you did do this ethnography project. It should be really obvious from this interpretation. You should have a lot of interesting things to say about what you learned. And then below that, I have a grading rubric. So the way that this rubric works is if you've done a really great job on your interpretation section is really clearly organized and shows the multiple themes that you identified. The section headers show these 3 different major themes. If you've done an excellent job on that, I'm going to give you the full 10 points. If you have direct quotes from participants included in each section to illustrate your observations, I'll give you 10 points if you've done an excellent job on that. If your participant quotes clearly fit with the paragraphs and I can see how you're connecting them to your observations, I'll give you 5 points for that. And then so on. So if it's just okay, I'll give you only 8 points on that part. So that's how your kind of final grade on this section is calculated. And then I'm going to show you, I also updated this ethnography rubric, which was posted already. But now it includes more description, more detail of what each section should be. And that's because I'm not going to be giving you as much feedback if you're not turning in your rough drafts, since I made those optional. So your introduction, I have given a whole bunch of description about what that should be. Hopefully, if you already turned in your introduction rough draft, you already have a pretty good idea of what you need to have in there based on my comments. And then for your methods and community description, these are the same rubrics that were posted before. I just added some more explanation for each section. And then I've included this one for your interpretation section that I just went over. Note that your direct quotes from participants should really rarely be more than 1/4 of a page. They should usually just be a few lines of something that the person said that was really interesting, that illustrates the theme that you're trying to write about. So it shouldn't be pages and pages of quotes. It should be just a few quotes, maybe 1 or 2 per page in that interpretation section that are not filling the whole page. I have some guidance on your discussion and conclusions. You can do that as 2 separate sections or as just 1 section. That's up to you. But you should have a paragraph right at the beginning of your conclusion that says something like, in sum, here's what I've told you. So you should kind of reiterate the 3 major themes, or the however many major themes, and why they're important, how that relates to cultural anthropology. And then you should kind of give me some more summarizing of your main findings, how it relates to cultural anthropology, bring back some of your references. So some of the same references that you used in the introduction are often brought back in the conclusion to remind the reader how that's important to cultural anthropology. And then you should have at least 1 or 2 concluding paragraphs at the end that reiterate the important lessons learned from the project from an anthropological perspective, and point to some topics for future research. So things that you weren't able to research, but that your research points to as something that might be interesting to learn more about. And then at the end here, the last 20 points that wasn't included in those earlier rubrics, since those were designed for the rough draft, are for your in-text citations, your grammar and spelling, and your final bibliography. So your grammar and spelling is important. It's worth about 5 points, but I have a note here, just like usual, that if you have so many spelling and grammatical errors that I can't understand what you're trying to say, you'll probably lose a few more points on some of the content sections. So make sure you proofread. One of the recommendations for proofreading is that you read it out loud to yourself. Try that and make sure that it makes sense. Make sure that what you're trying to say is not super long sentences that I'm gonna have trouble following. Just do some proofreading. You can get your roommate to proofread, you can get your mom to proofread, you can get a classmate to proofread. You can ask me to look over your sections before you turn in your final ethnography, but please don't do that the night before it's due. Do it in advance. I need at least a week to turn those around, and then you're gonna need some time to review my comments. So make sure that you're sending me any drafts by the week 16, May 1st at the latest. You should be using in-text citations that should be correctly formatted. So here I have an example of what a correctly formatted in-text citation in APA format looks like. So it should just be the author's last name and the year, not the entire title of the article, unless there's some reason that the title is really important to your argument. That's just a way to fill up space. It doesn't fool me. And I don't want to see that. I want to see this proper in-text citation. So it's either in parentheses, the last name of the author and the year, or if you're wanting to directly talk about the author, which is helpful to avoid passive voice, and you wanted to say, for example, Ahern explained that people, blah, 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 you would put Ahern and then in parentheses the year right after her last name. Also note the in-text citations I have here is worth 10 points, but if you don't cite your sources, if you're talking about things in the other sections of the text that should be cited, you may lose more than 10 points on that. As I noted, not using in-text citations, not citing your sources for any ideas that are not your own ideas is considered a form of plagiarism. So make sure that you're really careful about including those in-text citations. Make sure it's clear where the idea came from. And then you should have a bibliography section at the end, or a references cited section that includes a list of properly formatted citations. All the citations that you have cited in the text as in-text citations should be in that list. There should be at least 10 citations there, 5 from your outside research and 5 from class, like you have in your annotated bibliography. But the more the better. More citations, the better. If you want to relate your topic to some idea that you heard somewhere or you saw somewhere or you saw in the newspaper, cite it and put that citation in your bibliography. I also have some examples here on how to cite articles from the guest textbook. So this is again using Laura Ahern's article as an example. So you would put the author's last name and then first name, then you have the year, the title of the article, the pages, and then it would be in the guest cultural anthropology reader. So you don't cite guest to cite someone else's writing. That's not giving proper credit to the actual author. Guest didn't write all of these. He just curated all of these articles to make it easier for us to access them. So here's a little template. So you have your author's last name, first name, and then you would put in your chapter title and your pages, and then have it in this guest, Kenneth J., editor, cultural anthropology, a reader for a global age. And then here's your rubric, which I already just went over. It's the same as what's up here, but just with the point values there. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions as you go through this, please feel free to send me an email. I will be responding to emails as quickly as I can. I'm very happy to review your rough drafts still and give you feedback. I usually try to do that pretty quickly so that you can get back to your writing. If you have questions on how to pull out themes, let me know if you're struggling with any of this material. Watch the 2 videos that I posted and then get started on your coding and your analysis. And if you've already done that, work on the writing using this rubric that I posted. I hope everything's going well for all of you, and I will look forward to hearing from you this week and also participating in the class discussion with you.